Okay, so I really only have a few slides left for you guys. So this is just the very end of the human adaptation PowerPoint. So this is topic 5. So we had finished up talking about nutritional adaptations. And there is, we don't have time today, but just so you guys know, there is a link to a TED Talk on Hasda diet. Anthropologist Alyssa Crittenden studies Hasda diet and reproduction. And it is really an interesting example of how diet and reproduction are very connected. The Hasda are a very naturally living indigenous population, and they live very much like our ancestors likely lived in bands of nomadic hunters and gatherers. So it is very interesting to look at this parallel of their diet and how it impacts their reproductive strategies and cycles. So if you have time, it is about a 15-minute TED Talk. I do recommend that you check it out. It definitely might help solidify some of this information we've covered in chapter 14 about human adaptation. But the last couple slides I have for you are on workload adaptation. So we talked about the different levels of adaptations in humans. We talked about genetic adaptations that are referring to any sort of, if it's coded for in the DNA, or if it's a mutation or a change in the DNA, that's genetic level. If it's something that happens during childhood and or adolescence, that's considered developmental. If it's something that can happen at any phase very quickly, or at least relatively quickly, like sweating, shivering, vasodilation, production of extra red blood cells, those are all considered physiological adaptations. And then cultural adaptations are those changes in our behavior. So the ways that we get our food, the ways that we engage in workload, this is considered a cultural as well. Yes, Julian?
No, I have nothing.
Okay, sorry. Those are considered cultural or behavioral adaptations. So something as simple as using sunscreen to protect from UV radiation, that could be considered a cultural adaptation. Or the housing structures that we use in the Arctic versus the housing structures we would use in the tropics. Or the clothing that we wear in Kansas City versus the clothing that we would wear in Southern California. Those are all cultural strategies. Bone growth is affected by disease, physiological processes, nutrition, and mechanical forces. Wolff's Law is stating that bone is produced where it is needed and removed where it is not. So essentially, the more active you are, the more robust and thicker your bone structure will be. So human populations that are especially active, hunter-gatherers, for example, that travel 7, 8 miles a day just to gather the food and water for survival, are going to have really thick, really robust bone morphology. And then human populations that are more sedentary. So when we look at basically the last 10,000 years of our evolution, as we transition from hunting and gathering to more sedentary agriculture, and then of course in modern day, very industrialized modern society, where many of us work jobs and go to school and basically are in situations that force us to be pretty inactive. And that's even for our own survival or in financial survival. Some jobs don't even really allow you to be very active because they force you to be kind of locked in front of a computer screen for a long period of time. So the activity level can impact the robusticity and the health of your bones. The more active you are, the thicker your bones are, the easier it is for your bone structure to maintain homeostasis and function, and the less likely you are to suffer from things like osteoporosis and osteoarthritis. Uh, so these are just showing some images of bones here. So this is a cross section. So skeletal remodeling athletics, the upper arm or the humerus. So the humerus is the long bone in your upper arm here, and your lower arm, the bone here, that's your ulna. And then the bone here that allows you to do this motion, that's your radius. But your humerus is the singular long bone in your upper arm. And the upper arm bone or the humerus of the dominant arm may be much stronger than the non-dominant arm. So that's just demonstrating how Wolff's Law works, that the more you use a body part, The more developed the bones will be, the more developed the muscles and tendons will be. So that kind of idea, like either use it or lose it kind of idea. Anybody that's ever broken a bone, likely your doctor probably told you once a certain degree of healing had progressed, he or she likely told you to start becoming active again, because bone only regenerates due to activity. So, for example, I broke my back when I was 17. I crushed the fourth lumbar in my lower back. And the number one thing my doctor told me to do is to not become inactive. He said, as soon as you can, get up and start walking. Start walking, start jogging, start running, start moving. Because your bone is amazing. It will regenerate itself if you start moving again. But if you don't start moving, then it won't. So that was some amazing advice that my doctor gave me that, I'm very lucky. I'm 20 years out from that injury now, and I don't really have any lasting impressions from it. All right, so excess activity in reproductive ecology. So a human's activity level can also impact their reproductive cycle. So excess workload or exercise can interrupt female reproduction, essentially lowering overall fertility levels. So, and you may have heard of this before, females that are extremely athletic, extremely active, and have a very low getting tongue twisted here, body fat composition, sometimes don't start going through their cycle until much later, sometimes 17, 18, 19 years old. And they have longer periods of postpartum amenorrhea. So that term postpartum amenorrhea, that's referring to the period of time from the moment when that woman gives birth till when she starts her cycle again. So during postpartum amenorrhea, when she's in that period of time where her cycle hasn't begun again, she's essentially not capable of being fertile. Essentially, she's not fertile to acquire another pregnancy. Now, don't use that as birth control. It's not that's not a fail-safe method by any means. But in general, if the woman's cycle hasn't started again, she's not receptive to another pregnancy. Okay. Now, especially if you're looking at these natural populations that are not only extremely active, so they have high levels of activity and workload, so they're traveling 7-8 miles a day just to gather the food and the calories necessary for survival. So they have high levels of workload. They tend to have really low levels of body fat composition, so usually under 10%. And they tend to practice on-demand breastfeeding. So, the combination of all of those factors means that for the Kalahari, the Kalahari Bushmen, or for the Hasda, or for the Australian Aborigines, it makes a lot more sense for these human populations to have a birth every 4 to 5 years instead of every 2 or 3 years. Okay, simply because the workload is so excessive and children are born so dependent upon us for survival, it would be very difficult to have an infant that's practicing on-demand breastfeeding and a 2-year-old that's also still breastfeeding and a 4-year-old that's just barely not breastfeeding. That would be very difficult for that female to manage. So for females that are living in these hunting and gathering populations, it's much more advantageous for them to have longer periods of postpartum amenorrhea, longer periods of on-demand breastfeeding, and essentially longer periods of time between each birth. So women that live in the Kalahari Desert and this tribe tend to have a birth every 4 to 5 years instead of every 2 to 3 years, like you might expect. Okay, so in the Western world, obviously we live in a situation. Well, some of us live in a situation where it is possible to have children every year and a half or every 2 years. Now, I'm not going to say that that's the best situation for everyone, but it's certainly more possible because our lifestyles are certainly more sedentary. Okay, so that's just an example of how workload and activity level can impact reproductive ecology. Okay, and it's essentially, it is biological. They essentially have this period of time where they are, when they're practicing on-demand breastfeeding after they've given birth, they have this kind of natural period of infertility. And that doesn't mean they're not going to get their fertility back. It certainly does. And they may still have just as many births over the course of their reproductive cycle as a woman living in the United States would. It's just that essentially they space out their births a little bit more um, effectively for their survival. Is this making sense? Yes, no, maybe?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, so that's essentially the end of the PowerPoint presentation on human adaptation. So just a few things I want to point out to you guys in our Canvas shell. So hopefully most of this actually is already done for you because we did the Race, Power, and Evolution film notes during class Monday and today. So all you have to do is just click on that here and then upload your notes. The Human Adaptation Concept Review Packet, that's what we've been filling out as we've been following along with the audio and visual lecture. So again, all you have to do there is just upload your notes. So really the only homework per se is the race, power, and illusion discussion. So this one also, if you, as long as you've been paying attention, this one's probably going to be not something that's going to take you a whole lot of time. But it's, there is a link to the film there in case you need to watch it again. Hopefully you won't need to since we watched it in class together, but if you need to watch it again, it's there. And then it's going to give you your discussion prompts. Okay, so you don't have to respond to all of these, just select one or two. I gave you more options on this one, so there's 6 options. So just select one or two of them to respond to. And just make sure that you're citing your sources. So you can cite in the Zoom lectures, you can cite me, you can cite the textbook, chapter 13 or chapter 14. You can cite the film itself. You can cite any of the film clips that we've gone through. So just make sure that your initial post is somewhere between 300 to 500 words. Make sure you cite at least 3 sources. And do that sometime before Friday night. And then once you've done that, then you can reply to 2 peers sometime before Sunday. Okay, and all these instructions are here in the discussion outline here. And there's some examples of in-text citations if you need those, some links to technical support as well. But I really do encourage you guys to have a meaningful conversation here. These online discussions really are intended to give you the opportunity to bounce ideas off one another and hopefully learn from one another in this classroom. One other quick announcement before we end. I know I promised I'd let you guys go early today, but there is an option for a zoo field trip. It's still a few weekends off. It'll be Saturday. It's still a few weekends ahead of us. It'll be Saturday, November 18th. And we meet at the zoo entrance at 10 o'clock a.m. And we have a group of docents. The Los Angeles Zoo has trained docents that will take us around to the various primate exhibits and give us kind of a behind the scenes type tour. So those of you that are in lab, you will be able to complete your primatology labs completely on that day. And then those of you not in lab, you can earn extra credit by attending for lecture. And the other cool thing is instead of paying the $25 or whatever it is to get in, I can get everybody $5 ticket prices. The only secret is you have to arrive by 10 because I have to buy all the tickets right at 10 o'clock a.m. sharp and then hand out all the tickets and then the tour starts. So if you want those $5 tickets, you have to arrive no later than 10. Of course, my advice is arrive a little bit before 10 to give yourself a little cushion time. So you don't have to decide now, but I just wanted to make sure that you're aware of that information. There's some more information about it here in my recent announcements. So if you decide that you do want to attend, just reply to the announcement with this information so I can put you on my attendance list. Okay. Do we have any questions at all about anything in topic 5, anything about the zoo field trip, anything at all?
For the zoo field trip, can we bring someone with us?
Sure, yeah, you can bring someone. Just make sure it's someone that looks like a college